In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a question that haunts the dreams of every sentient being. It is whispered in the corridors of power, debated in the halls of academia, and feared in the darkest corners of space. The question is simple, yet its answer has shaped the fate of entire star systems. Who protects you while you sleep? For millennia, the galaxy's most advanced species believed they knew the answer. They built mighty fleets, constructed impenetrable fortresses, and forged alliances that span light years. They slept soundly, confident in their technological superiority and military might. But they were wrong. Deep in the forgotten reaches of the galaxy, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, lived a species that others considered primitive, emotional, and utterly insignificant. They called themselves humans. And, while the galaxy slept, these humans had been watching, waiting, and preparing for a threat that no one else had even imagined. This is the story of how a young alien princess discovered the truth behind that haunting question, and how her mother, a proud queen of the Valerian Empire, learned that sometimes the greatest protectors come from the most unexpected places. It is a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between those who guard and those who are guarded. The galaxy is about to learn that when darkness falls and ancient evils stir, there is indeed someone watching over them while they sleep. And that someone is far more dangerous to their enemies than anyone could have possibly imagined. Princess Zarathia pressed her scaled face against the cool transparisteel of her bedroom window, watching the twin moons of Valoria cast their silver light across the palace gardens. At 17 cycles old, she possessed the characteristic features of her species: elongated limbs, crystalline blue skin that shimmered in moonlight, and large, expressive eyes that could see far into the infrared spectrum. Despite her royal upbringing, Zara had always been curious about the galaxy beyond her homeworld, often spending sleepless nights gazing at the stars and wondering about the countless civilizations that dwelt among them. Tonight felt different, though she couldn't explain why. The palace, usually alive with the soft hum of security systems and the distant chatter of guards, seemed unusually quiet. Even the nocturnal creatures in the gardens below had fallen silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath. A soft chime from her personal communicator interrupted her thoughts. A holographic display showed an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Zara hesitated, knowing that unauthorized communications were strictly forbidden, especially for members of the royal family. However, her curiosity won over caution, and she activated the message. The hologram that materialized before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The figure appeared humanoid but smaller than most galactic species, with pale skin, short dark hair, and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience far beyond their apparent youth. The being wore what looked like a dark, form-fitting uniform with no visible insignia or identification marks. Princess Zarathia of the Valerian Empire, the figure spoke in accented galactic standard, though the accent was unfamiliar to her well-educated ear. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Corps. I'm transmitting this message because your life, and the lives of everyone in your star system, are in immediate danger." Zara's breath caught in her throat. The Terran Defense Corps? She had never heard of such an organization, and the term Terran was completely foreign to her. In all her studies of galactic civilizations, she had never encountered any reference to a species calling themselves Terrans. The human continued speaking, apparently unaware of the princess's confusion. "Our long-range sensors have detected a void fleet massing at the edge of your system. Based on their current trajectory and previous attack patterns, they will reach Valoria in approximately 6 standard hours. Your planetary defense systems, while impressive by galactic standards, will not be sufficient to repel this force." Void fleet? Zara's mind raced. She had studied military history extensively, and, while she knew of various pirate factions and rogue military units, she had never encountered any reference to an organization called the Void Fleet. Moreover, the woman spoke with such certainty about their capabilities that it suggested intimate knowledge of both the attackers and Valerian defenses. "I know this information is difficult to process," Lieutenant Chen continued, her expression softening slightly. "Your species, like most in this galaxy, has been deliberately kept unaware of the Void's existence. They are not merely pirates or raiders, Princess. They are something far more ancient and malevolent. They consume entire civilizations, leaving nothing behind but empty space and the screams of the dying echoing in the quantum void. The hologram paused, and Lieutenant Chen seemed to look directly at Zara despite the message being pre-recorded. There is hope, however. The Terran Defense Corps has been monitoring and engaging void incursions for over 2 centuries. We have ships in your system, ready to defend your people. But we cannot act without permission from your government, and traditional diplomatic channels would take too long. That's why I'm contacting you directly. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. If what this human said was true, then her entire understanding of galactic politics and security was fundamentally flawed. How could such a massive threat exist without her mother's knowledge? Queen Lysaandra was renowned throughout the galaxy for her intelligence network and political acumen. It seemed impossible that such a significant threat could have escaped her attention. I'm uploading tactical data to your personal system, the human continued. This information will prove our claims and provide your mother with everything she needs to make an informed decision. Time is short, Princess. The Void Fleet will not show mercy, and once they begin their assault, it will be too late for us to intervene effectively. The transmission ended, leaving Zara alone with her racing thoughts and a data packet that her communicator indicated was unlike anything in its databases. The encryption was so advanced that her device could barely recognize it as a valid file format, yet somehow it was perfectly readable once opened. What she saw made her blood run cold. Detailed sensor readings showed massive ships lurking at the very edge of the Valerian system, their energy signatures unlike anything in known galactic databases. These vessels were enormous, dwarfing even the largest Valerian dreadnoughts, and they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating disturbing distortions in the surrounding space. More troubling were the tactical analyses that accompanied the sensor data. The unknown human organization had somehow obtained detailed schematics of Valerian defense networks, ship specifications, and strategic deployment patterns. This level of intelligence gathering should have been impossible without insider knowledge or technology far beyond current galactic standards. Yet the most shocking revelation came in the historical files. The data contained records of dozens of civilizations that had simply vanished from galactic records over the past millennium. Worlds that had been thriving centers of commerce and culture had become empty systems with no explanation for their inhabitants' disappearance. The official galactic databases listed these incidents as exploration missions or voluntary relocations, but the Terran data told a different story. Each disappeared civilization showed the same pattern: a period of increasing isolation, reports of strange signals from the outer system, and then complete silence. Rescue missions, when they were attempted, found only empty worlds with all signs of life systematically removed. No bodies, no ruins, no evidence of struggle. Just emptiness. The files contained surveillance footage from automated monitoring stations that had somehow survived these incidents. Zara watched in horror as massive, dark ships systematically harvested entire populations, loading millions of beings into transport bays before disappearing into the void between stars. The technology involved was beyond anything she had ever seen, suggesting these attackers possessed capabilities that made even the most advanced galactic civilizations seem primitive by comparison. But, perhaps most disturbing of all were the references to previous intervention attempts by galactic forces. Time and, again, the most powerful military fleets in known space had been assembled to investigate or respond to these disappearances. Without exception, these fleets had either been completely destroyed or had simply vanished themselves, adding to the growing list of unexplained losses. According to the Terran data, this pattern had been occurring for over 1,000 years, with the frequency of attacks gradually increasing. What had once been isolated incidents affecting remote systems had evolved into a systematic campaign of extinction that was slowly working its way toward the galactic core. And, now, they were coming for Valoria. Zara's hands trembled as she reviewed the tactical projections. The Void Fleet approaching her home system was larger than any previously recorded, suggesting that her world had been specifically targeted for reasons that weren't immediately clear. The attack projection showed her planet's defenses being overwhelmed within hours, followed by the same systematic harvesting that had claimed so many other worlds. But the Terran data also included something else: deployment records for human forces already positioned throughout the system. Ships that somehow remained invisible to Valerian sensors were strategically placed to intercept the Void Fleet, but only if they received authorization to engage. Without that permission, they would be forced to remain hidden and watch another civilization fall. The weight of this knowledge settled on Zara's shoulders like a physical burden. If she brought this information to her mother immediately, there might be time to coordinate a proper response. But, if she was wrong, if this was somehow an elaborate deception, she would be endangering the security of the realm based on the word of an unknown alien species. Yet as she looked out at the peaceful gardens below, knowing that millions of Valorians were sleeping peacefully in their homes, completely unaware of the approaching danger, she realized she had no choice. Whatever the consequences, she couldn't remain silent while her people faced extinction. Rising from her window seat, Princess Zarathia gathered the data files and prepared to wake her mother with news that would challenge everything the Valorian Empire believed about their place in the galaxy. Outside, the twin moons continued their eternal dance across the sky, but she knew that by tomorrow night, those same moons might be looking down on a dead world. Unless the humans were telling the truth. Unless there really were guardians watching over them while they slept, protectors whose very existence had been hidden from galactic knowledge for reasons she couldn't yet understand. Taking a deep breath, Zara opened her chamber door and stepped into the corridor, her bare feet silent on the polished stone as she made her way toward the royal quarters. Behind her, the communicator continued to display the Terran tactical data, its alien symbols and incomprehensible technology representing either salvation or the most elaborate deception in galactic history. Time, as Lieutenant Chen had warned, was running short. Queen Lysandra was not easily awakened, and she was even less easily impressed. At 230 cycles old, she had ruled the Valorian Empire for nearly a century, weathering political crises, economic upheavals, and military conflicts that had tested her resolve and wisdom countless times. When her daughter burst into the royal chambers at the deepest hour of night, the queen's first instinct was irritation rather than alarm. "Zara, what is the meaning of this?" the queen demanded, her voice carrying the authority that had cowed diplomats and generals across the galaxy. Her crystalline skin glowed with a faint inner light, a sign of elevated emotional state that most Valorians would immediately recognize as a warning to proceed with extreme caution. But Princess Zara was beyond such considerations. "Mother, we need to evacuate the planet immediately. There's a fleet of ships approaching that will destroy everything if we don't act now." Queen Lysandra studied her daughter's face carefully. Zara was intelligent and level-headed, not given to flights of fancy or dramatic proclamations. The fear in her eyes was genuine, and the data pad she clutched in her hands trembled with the intensity of her grip. "Explain yourself, child." Slowly and clearly. For the next 20 minutes, Zara recounted everything she had learned from the mysterious Terran transmission. She showed her mother the tactical data, the historical records, and the terrifying projections of what would happen if the Void Fleet reached Valoria unopposed. Throughout the explanation, Queen Lysandra maintained her composure, but her experienced mind was already racing through the implications of what she was hearing. When Zara finished, the queen was silent for a long moment, processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic security and political reality. Finally, she activated her personal communicator and summoned her senior advisors for an emergency session. Within minutes, the Royal Strategy Chamber was filled with the highest-ranking military and intelligence officials in the Valorian Empire. Admiral Kestar, commander of the Home Fleet, arrived still wearing his sleeping garments but fully alert. Intelligence Director Mordani materialized via hologram from her secure facility in the capital's underground complex. Defense Minister Velthara burst through the chamber doors barely 10 minutes after receiving the summons, her usual diplomatic composure replaced by obvious concern. "My queen," Admiral Kestar said formally, "what crisis requires such urgent consultation?" Rather than answer directly, Queen Lysandra activated the chamber's main holographic display and uploaded the Terran data files. "Tell me what you make of this information." The room fell silent as the senior officials reviewed the alien intelligence. Zara watched their faces carefully, noting the progression of emotions from skepticism to confusion to growing alarm. These were experienced professionals who had dealt with every conceivable threat to the Empire, yet the data before them was clearly beyond their previous experience. Intelligence Director Mordani was the first to speak, her voice tight with professional concern. "My queen, if this information is accurate, it represents the most significant intelligence failure in our history. We have no records of this Void Fleet or any disappearances matching the patterns described here. That's because they've been systematically erased, Defense Minister Velthera interrupted, her fingers flying over her personal data pad. I'm cross-referencing these historical records with our archives, and I'm finding disturbing discrepancies. Civilizations that are listed here as vanished appear in our databases as having relocated or evolved beyond physical existence. The official explanations are so generic they're essentially meaningless. Admiral Kestar studied the tactical projections with the eye of a professional military strategist. The sensor data appears genuine, and the analysis of our defensive capabilities is uncomfortably accurate. However, I'm troubled by one aspect of this intelligence. Which is, the Queen inquired. The organization providing this information demonstrates knowledge of our systems that should be impossible to obtain without extensive infiltration or surveillance. Yet we have no record of any contact with this Terran Defense Corps. They've somehow managed to study our capabilities in detail while remaining completely undetected by our intelligence services. Intelligence Director Mordani nodded grimly. That level of stealth capability suggests technology far beyond current galactic standards. If these humans can remain invisible to our sensors while conducting detailed surveillance, what else might they be capable of? The implications hung heavy in the air. If the Terrans possessed such advanced technology, they could potentially represent an even greater threat than the mysterious Void Fleet. Yet they had chosen to warn Valoria rather than exploit their technological advantage, suggesting motivations that weren't immediately clear. Mother, Princess Zara interjected, the transmission indicated that the Terrans have ships already positioned in our system, ready to defend us. But they need governmental authorization to engage. If we're going to accept their help, we need to decide quickly. Defense Minister Velthera looked up from her data analysis with a troubled expression. I've been reviewing our long-range sensor data for the past month, and I'm finding anomalies that could support the human claims. There have been gravitational distortions at the edge of our system that our technicians attributed to natural phenomena, but they could easily be the signatures of massive ships using advanced stealth technology. Admiral Kestar activated the chamber's strategic display, showing the current disposition of Valerian forces. Our home fleet consists of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, and supporting vessels. Against a conventional threat, this would be more than sufficient to defend our system. However, if these projections are accurate, we would be facing a force approximately 10 times our size, equipped with technology that our weapons may not be able to penetrate. The weight of command had never felt heavier on Queen Lysandra's shoulders. She was being asked to make a decision that could determine the survival of her entire civilization based on information from an unknown source. Yet the alternative, if the humans were telling the truth, was the systematic destruction of everything she had sworn to protect. Director Mordani, she said finally, how quickly can you verify any of this information through our own intelligence networks? Given the scope of what we're dealing with, a thorough verification would take days or weeks. However, I can have my best analysts review the historical data within the next few hours. If there's a pattern of disappearances being covered up, they should be able to detect it. We don't have days or weeks, Princess Zara said urgently. According to the Terran data, the Void Fleet will reach our system in less than 4 hours. Admiral Kestar consulted his tactical displays. I can have our fastest reconnaissance ships conduct a sweep of the outer system within 2 hours. If there are hostile forces approaching, we should be able to detect them with concentrated sensor sweeps. And, if the reconnaissance ships don't return? Defense Minister Velthera asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. If the Valerian scouts encountered the Void Fleet and were destroyed or captured, it would not only confirm the human warnings but also deprive the Empire of valuable intelligence-gathering assets when they were most needed. Queen Lysandra closed her eyes and reached deep within herself for the wisdom that had guided her through a century of rule. When she opened them again, her expression was resolute. Admiral Kestar, dispatch your reconnaissance units immediately. Director Mordani, begin emergency verification of the historical data. Minister Velthera, prepare evacuation protocols for the civilian population, but do not implement them yet. We cannot afford to create panic based on unverified information. And the human offer of assistance? Princess Zara asked. The Queen was silent for a long moment, weighing options that could determine the fate of billions. Send a response to the Terrans. Tell them we acknowledge their warning and request additional proof of their capabilities before granting authorization for military intervention. If they are truly trying to help us, they will understand our caution. If they have ulterior motives, this request should reveal them." As her advisors dispersed to carry out their orders, Queen Lysandra remained in the strategy chamber with her daughter, staring at the tactical displays that showed their peaceful system blissfully unaware of the approaching threat. "Mother," Zara said softly, "what if we're making the wrong decision? What if the Void Fleet destroys the reconnaissance ships and we lose our chance to accept Terran help?" The Queen placed a scaled hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Leadership, my child, is the art of making impossible decisions with insufficient information. We must balance trust with caution, hope with realism. If these humans are our salvation, then we will know soon enough. If they are our enemies, then caution may be our only protection." Through the chamber's transparisteel windows, the twin moons continued their ancient dance, their silver light reflecting off the scaled walls in patterns that had comforted Valerian royalty for centuries. But, tonight, that light seemed somehow diminished, as if the approaching darkness was already beginning to swallow the illumination that had guided their civilization since time immemorial. In her heart, Queen Lysandra knew that whatever happened in the next few hours would change the Valerian Empire forever. The question was whether that change would lead to salvation or destruction. And, for the first time in her long reign, she was not certain she possessed the wisdom necessary to make the right choice. Outside, the first reconnaissance ships were already launching from the orbital defense platforms, their crews unaware that they might be flying toward an enemy unlike anything their training had prepared them for. The fate of an entire civilization now hung in the balance, dependent on the courage of a few pilots and the wisdom of a queen who had suddenly discovered that her understanding of the galaxy was far more limited than she had ever imagined. The response from Lieutenant Chen arrived exactly 37 minutes after Queen Lysandra had sent her cautious inquiry. This time, however, the transmission was not a simple holographic message but a full diplomatic communication package that caused the royal communication systems to briefly overload from the sheer volume of data being received. Princess Zara was present when the transmission materialized in the strategy chamber, and she immediately noticed that Lieutenant Chen was no longer alone. Beside the human officer stood a figure that made the assembled Valerian officials step backward in involuntary amazement. The being appeared to be human as well, but clearly of much higher rank based on the deference shown by Lieutenant Chen. This individual was tall and lean, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to contain depths of experience that spoke of battles fought across decades of conflict. The uniform was similar to Chen's but bore insignia that were clearly authoritative, though their meaning was lost on the Valerian observers. "Your Majesty," the senior human said, speaking in perfect galactic standard with no trace of accent, "I am Admiral Sarah Mitchell, Commanding Officer of the Terran Defense Corps 3rd Fleet. I understand you require additional verification of our capabilities before authorizing our intervention on your behalf." Queen Lysandra studied the human admiral with the calculating gaze she had perfected over decades of diplomatic negotiations. There was something about the human's demeanor that suggested vast experience with exactly this type of situation, as if she had conducted similar conversations with other species countless times before. "Admiral Mitchell," the Queen replied formally, "I appreciate your understanding of our position. However, you must realize that accepting military assistance from an unknown force could be interpreted as an act of desperation or poor judgment by our people and our allies. We require proof that you are both capable of the assistance you offer and trustworthy enough to warrant such unprecedented cooperation." Admiral Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Your caution is not only understandable but commendable, Your Majesty. A leader who accepts help without verification would be dangerously naive. I'm prepared to provide the proof you require." The Admiral activated a device on her wrist, and, suddenly, the chamber's holographic displays flickered and changed. Instead of showing local tactical information, they now displayed real-time sensor data from a perspective somewhere in the outer reaches of the Valerian system. What they saw made every Valerian present catch their breath in shock. The Void Fleet was real, and it was massive beyond comprehension. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than the biggest Valerian dreadnought, moved through space in formations that suggested military precision perfected over centuries of conquest. The vessels themselves seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating disturbing distortions in the surrounding space that hurt to look at directly. But, more shocking than the enemy fleet was what surrounded it. Terran ships, previously invisible to all Valerian sensors, suddenly became visible as their stealth systems partially disengaged. The human vessels were smaller than the void ships but far more numerous, positioned in a three-dimensional network that completely surrounded the approaching enemy. Their design was unlike anything in galactic databases, combining elegant curves with aggressive angles that suggested both advanced aesthetics and devastating firepower. As you can see, Admiral Mitchell continued calmly, our intelligence regarding the Void Fleet was accurate. They are currently 3 hours and 17 minutes from your outer orbital defenses. Our ships have been tracking them for the past 6 days, maintaining stealth protocols to avoid premature engagement. Admiral Kestar studied the display with professional intensity. How many ships do you have in our system? Currently deployed? 437 combat vessels ranging from escort frigates to dreadnought-class battleships. Additionally, we have support vessels, medical ships, and emergency evacuation craft standing by in case civilian protection becomes necessary. The number was staggering. The Terrans had managed to position a fleet larger than anything in known galactic history within the Valerian system without being detected. The technological implications were almost incomprehensible. Defense Minister Velthara leaned forward in her chair. Admiral Mitchell, these capabilities you're demonstrating suggest technology far beyond current galactic standards. Where exactly do humans originate, and how have you remained hidden from galactic knowledge for so long? Admiral Mitchell exchanged a brief glance with Lieutenant Chen before responding. Minister Velthara, the answers to those questions are complex and would require extensive briefings that we simply don't have time for today. What I can tell you is that humanity has been aware of the void threat for over 2 centuries, and we've dedicated our entire civilization to developing the capabilities necessary to combat it. Your entire civilization? Queen Lysoandra asked. Yes, Your Majesty. When we first encountered the void, we lost our homeworld and approximately 60% of our population. The survivors had 2 choices: flee to the edges of the galaxy and hope the threat would never find us, or dedicate everything we had to becoming strong enough to fight back. We chose to fight. The weight of that statement settled over the chamber like a physical presence. The humans weren't just offering military assistance, they were offering the combined efforts of a species that had sacrificed everything to become guardians against a threat that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. Princess Zara spoke into the silence. Admiral, the data you provided earlier showed that this pattern of disappearances has been occurring for over 1,000 years. If humanity has only been fighting the void for 2 centuries, what was protecting the galaxy before that? Admiral Mitchell's expression grew somber. Princess, that's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of our research. Based on archaeological evidence and recovered data from various civilizations, we believe the void has been systematically harvesting galactic populations for millennia. Before humanity began our intervention campaigns, there was no organized resistance. Civilizations simply vanished, and the survivors rationalized the disappearances rather than face the truth. You're saying that entire species have been consumed over the centuries, and the galaxy has simply ignored it? Intelligence Director Mordani asked incredulously. Not ignored, Director. Suppressed. The void doesn't just destroy civilizations, they systematically erase evidence of their existence from galactic records. They have infiltration capabilities that allow them to modify databases, alter historical records, and implant false memories in key individuals. The galaxy hasn't been ignoring the threat because they're unaware of it. They've been prevented from seeing it through advanced psychological and technological manipulation. The implications were staggering. If the humans were correct, then the galaxy's understanding of its own history was fundamentally compromised. Countless civilizations had been erased not just physically but from memory itself, leaving survivors to accept convenient lies rather than face an incomprehensible truth. This is why we operate in secrecy, Lieutenant Chen added. Direct revelation of the void's existence typically results in panic, denial, or worse, it attracts their attention to species that might otherwise remain unnoticed. We've learned that the most effective protection comes from hidden guardianship rather than open alliance. Admiral Kestar had been studying the tactical displays throughout the conversation, and his expression was increasingly troubled. Admiral Mitchell, based on these formations and approach vectors, the Void Fleet will reach our reconnaissance ships in approximately 43 minutes. If you're going to intercept them, you'll need to act soon. Actually, Admiral Kestar, we've already begun preliminary engagements. Our stealth ships have been conducting harassment attacks on their outer formations for the past hour, designed to appear as sensor malfunctions or equipment failures rather than organized resistance. The Void commanders are currently slowing their advance to investigate these anomalies, which has bought us additional time. The revelation that the battle had already begun sent a shock through the assembled Valorians. They were in the middle of a military engagement that could determine their species' survival, yet they had been completely unaware of the conflict occurring in their own system. Your Majesty, Admiral Mitchell continued, I need your decision. Our current harassment tactics will only delay the Void Fleet for another 2 hours at most. If we're going to mount an effective defense of your system, we need authorization to engage with our full capabilities. This means revealing our presence not just to the Void but, potentially to other galactic powers who monitor this region. Queen Lysandra felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. She was being asked to make a decision that would expose her empire to unknown consequences from both human and galactic political reactions. Yet the alternative was the systematic destruction of everything she had sworn to protect. Admiral Mitchell, she said finally, if we grant this authorization, what guarantees do we have that humanity won't become a threat to our sovereignty once the immediate crisis has passed? The human admiral smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun, and there was something in that expression that spoke of genuine respect for the Valerian Queen's political acumen. Your Majesty, the fact that you're asking that question proves that you're exactly the kind of leader we hope to work with. I can offer you no guarantees except this: humanity learned long ago that forced protection is no protection at all. We don't seek to conquer or control. We seek to preserve the diversity and independence that makes galactic civilization worth protecting. If we save your people only to dominate them, then we become no different from the enemy we're fighting. The honesty in the Admiral's voice was unmistakable, and Queen Lysandra found herself believing words that should have been impossible to trust coming from a complete stranger representing an unknown power. Very well, she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute decision. You have the Valerian Empire's authorization to defend our system using whatever means you deem necessary. We place our trust in your stated intentions and your demonstrated capabilities. Admiral Mitchell nodded formally. Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't disappoint that trust. You should know that this engagement may reveal things about the galaxy that will be difficult to accept. The Void's true nature is disturbing, and understanding what we're really fighting may challenge your species' fundamental beliefs about reality itself. With that ominous warning, the transmission ended, leaving the Valerian leadership to contemplate the fact that they had just authorized an unknown alien species to conduct military operations in their sovereign space based on little more than trust and desperate necessity. Outside the palace windows, the twin moons continued their ancient dance, but now their light seemed different somehow, as if the very nature of the night sky had been changed by the knowledge of what lurked in the darkness between the stars. The Battle of Valoria began not with the thunder of conventional weapons but with silence. Princess Zara stood in the palace's orbital observation deck, surrounded by the most advanced sensor equipment the Valerian Empire could produce, yet the displays showed nothing but empty space where the Terran fleet should have been engaging the approaching Void forces. For 23 agonizing minutes after Queen Lysandra had granted authorization, there was no indication that anything unusual was occurring in the outer system. Then, space itself began to scream. The first sign that the battle had truly begun was a distortion in the quantum field readings that made the palace's most sensitive instruments emit warning signals that their operators had never heard before. The very fabric of spacetime seemed to be vibrating with energies that defied conventional physics, creating ripples that propagated through subspace at velocities that should have been impossible. My princess, came the voice of senior technician Velmar, his usual calm professionalism replaced by barely controlled amazement. We're detecting energy discharges of a magnitude that our instruments can barely measure. Whatever weapons the humans are using, they operate on principles completely outside our technological understanding. Through the observation deck's massive transparasteel windows, the distant stars began to flicker and dance as gravitational waves from the conflict reached the inner system. Each pulse of distortion represented destructive forces being unleashed that dwarfed anything in Valerian military experience, yet somehow these titanic energies remained precisely contained to prevent damage to civilian populations. Admiral Kestar materialized via hologram, his image slightly unstable due to the quantum interference affecting communication systems.
Princess, I'm receiving preliminary reports from our reconnaissance teams.
They've reached the outer system, but what they're describing doesn't match any combat scenario in our tactical databases.
What are they seeing? Zara asked, though part of her dreaded the answer.
Ships that appear and disappear without warning, weapons that seem to bend space itself, and enemy vessels that are changing in ways that defy description. Our pilots are requesting permission to withdraw before they suffer psychological damage from witnessing combat that their minds aren't equipped to process.
Before Zara could respond, the observation deck's main display activated, showing a transmission from one of the Valerian reconnaissance ships.
The pilot's face was visible, but his expression showed a kind of existential terror that no amount of military training could have prepared him for.
Command, this is Scout 7.
I'm transmitting live footage of the engagement, but I'm not sure our communication systems can adequately convey what we're witnessing here. The display shifted to show the pilot's external camera feed, and Princess Zara felt her breath catch in her throat. The Terran ships were no longer the sleek, elegant vessels they had appeared to be in the earlier transmissions. Instead, they seemed to be transforming in real time, their hulls flowing and shifting like liquid metal as they adapted to combat requirements. Some vessels split into multiple smaller units that moved in perfect synchronization, while others combined into massive weapons platforms that dwarfed even the largest void ships. But it was the weapons themselves that truly defied comprehension. Rather than firing conventional projectiles or energy beams, the human ships seemed to be manipulating the fundamental forces of physics itself. Space around void vessels would suddenly collapse into microscopic points of infinite density, crushing the enemy ships into quantum singularities that then exploded outward with the force of miniature supernovas. Other human weapons created temporal distortions that aged enemy ships millions of years in seconds, reducing them to cosmic dust that drifted away on stellar winds. Most disturbing of all were the weapons that seemed to attack the very concept of existence itself. Void ships would simply cease to be, not destroyed or vaporized but literally edited out of reality as if they had never existed in the first place. The space they had occupied remained empty, but somehow wrong, as if the universe itself was struggling to fill a gap that shouldn't have existed. Princess, Senior Technician Velmar said in a whisper, the energy readings we're detecting suggest that the humans are manipulating forces that exist beyond our dimensional framework. They're not just using advanced technology, they're using physics that operates according to rules we don't understand. The Void Fleet, for its part, was proving to be an enemy unlike anything Valerian military scientists had ever theorized. The dark ships didn't just absorb light, they seemed to absorb reality itself, creating fields of absolute nothingness that consumed everything they touched. Their weapons fired streams of concentrated entropy that aged and corroded everything they contacted, turning the elegant human ships into rusted hulks in seconds. But, perhaps most terrifying were the Void's apparent attempts at psychological warfare. As Valerian observers watched, the enemy ships began broadcasting signals that directly affected the consciousness of anyone who received them. Reconnaissance pilots reported seeing impossible geometries that hurt to contemplate, hearing voices that spoke in languages that predated the evolution of sentient life, and experiencing memories of civilizations they had never known being systematically harvested and consumed. Command, came the strained voice of Scout 7's pilot, I'm reading massive energy spikes from both fleets.
Something big is about to happen.
On the display, the space between the two fleets began to distort in ways that made reality itself seem unstable. The Terran ships had formed a complex three-dimensional pattern that created geometric relationships between their positions that somehow amplified their individual capabilities exponentially. Meanwhile, the Void Fleet had arranged itself into formations that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human perception could process, creating strategic advantages that operated according to mathematical principles beyond conventional understanding. Then, both fleets fired simultaneously. The collision of forces created an explosion that briefly outshone Valoria's star. The quantum shockwave that resulted caused every piece of electronic equipment in the Valerian system to shut down for 17 seconds, during which time the planet existed in a bubble of absolute silence broken only by the sound of wind and the beating of hearts. When the systems came back online, the tactical display showed a sight that would haunt Princess Zara for the rest of her life. Nearly 60% of both fleets had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not scattered, but completely absent from reality, as if they had been carefully edited out of existence by some cosmic force beyond comprehension. The remaining ships hung motionless in space, apparently as stunned by the exchange as their observers. "Status report," Princess Zara managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper.
Admiral Kestar's hologram flickered back to stability.
"Princess, our reconnaissance ships are reporting that the quantum fabric of space in the engagement zone has been permanently altered. The region where the main exchange occurred now exists in a state of temporal flux that makes it essentially uninhabitable.
Any ship entering that zone would experience time at a rate completely disconnected from the rest of the universe." But, even as the Admiral spoke, both fleets were already reforming. The surviving Terran ships began to change again, their transformed configuration suggesting that the previous engagement had been merely a test of capabilities rather than a decisive battle. The remaining void vessels likewise adapted, their dark hulls opening to reveal internal structures that existed in spatial dimensions that hurt to look at directly. "Princess," came a new voice over the communication system, "this is Admiral Mitchell. I wanted to provide you with a brief tactical update before we proceed to the next phase of the engagement." Mitchell's image appeared on the display, and Princess Zara was shocked to see that the human admiral showed no signs of stress or concern despite having just witnessed the destruction of a significant portion of her fleet. "Admiral," Zara said, "your losses
were anticipated and acceptable, Princess. What you just witnessed was a probing engagement designed to test void capabilities and force them to reveal their tactical doctrine. We've confirmed that this particular fleet is equipped with reality manipulation technology that exceeds our previous encounters. This means we'll need to employ more exotic countermeasures." The casual way Admiral Mitchell discussed the loss of dozens of ships and, presumably thousands of crew members sent a chill down Princess Zara's spine. What kind of war was humanity fighting that such losses could be considered routine casualties in a preliminary skirmish? "What are your intentions for the next phase?" Princess Zara asked. Admiral Mitchell's expression grew serious. "Princess, what happens next will likely be disturbing to observe. The Void's reality manipulation capabilities mean that conventional combat is ineffective. To defeat them, we'll need to employ weapons and tactics that operate outside the normal parameters of physics. I want to warn you that what you're about to witness may challenge your species' fundamental understanding of reality itself." Before Princess Zara could ask what she meant, both fleets began their final approach toward each other. But, this time, the very nature of space around them began to change in ways that defied description. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange into impossible configurations, and the familiar constellations that had guided Valerian navigation for millennia became geometric patterns that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. The Battle of Valoria was entering its final phase, and Princess Zara was beginning to understand that regardless of the outcome, the universe itself would never be quite the same again. The humans had proven they could defend against the void threat, but the price of that protection was exposure to forces and realities that most galactic civilizations were not equipped to comprehend. Outside the palace windows, the twin moons continued their eternal dance, but now their light was filtered through spatial distortions that made them appear to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, a constant reminder that the night sky itself had become a battlefield in a war that transcended conventional understanding of conflict. The final phase of the Battle of Valoria lasted exactly 47 minutes and changed the fundamental nature of reality within a sphere of space encompassing the entire outer system. Princess Zara watched from the observation deck as the human fleet enacted what Admiral Mitchell had euphemistically described as exotic countermeasures. The Terran ships no longer resembled anything that could be called vessels in any conventional sense. Instead, they had become focal points for forces that operated according to principles that existed beyond the framework of normal physics. Some of the human craft had transformed into geometric impossibilities that somehow maintained structural integrity despite violating every known law of engineering. Others had become translucent, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional phases while remaining functionally present in baseline reality. Most disturbing of all were the ships that had apparently transcended physical existence entirely, becoming patterns of pure information that could rewrite the fundamental constants of spacetime within localized areas. The Void Fleet, confronted with an enemy that could match their reality manipulation capabilities, had abandoned all pretense of conventional warfare. Their ships had opened like dark flowers, revealing internal structures that existed in spatial dimensions beyond normal perception. From these openings emerged entities that could only be described as living mathematics, geometric forms that moved according to equations that hurt to contemplate. Princess, Senior Technician Velmar called out, his voice tight with strain, our monitoring equipment is detecting alterations to the quantum field structure throughout the engagement zone. The basic constants of physics appear to be fluctuating according to tactical requirements. What followed was not a battle in any sense that Valerian military doctrine could comprehend, but rather a contest between competing interpretations of reality itself. The humans and the void entities engaged in combat that took place simultaneously across multiple dimensional phases, each side attempting to impose their version of physical law upon the contested space. Space would suddenly invert, with vacuum becoming solid matter and solid objects becoming empty space. Time flowed backward in some regions while accelerating beyond measure in others, creating temporal eddies where cause followed effect and outcomes preceded their initiating events. The very concept of distance became negotiable, with ships that were light years apart engaging in close combat while vessels occupying the same coordinates existed without interaction. Through it all, Princess Zara found herself developing a growing understanding of what the humans had sacrificed to become capable of this level of warfare. They hadn't just advanced their technology, they had fundamentally altered their own nature to become something that could survive in a universe where reality itself was a weapon. Princess Zara, came Admiral Mitchell's voice through communication systems that somehow remained functional despite the chaos surrounding them, I wanted to give you advance warning that we're about to implement our final tactical protocol.
What you're about to witness represents the ultimate expression of human defensive capability. The remaining human ships began to converge into a formation that existed in more dimensions than Valerian sensors could track.
As they approached each other, the boundaries between individual vessels began to blur until they formed a single massive entity that somehow maintained the characteristics of all its component parts while becoming something entirely new. This merged construct began to emit a frequency that resonated through subspace in patterns that suggested communication rather than weaponry. But it was communication directed not at the void entities but at the structure of reality itself, as if the humans were engaging in direct negotiation with the fundamental forces of the universe. The response was immediate and absolute. A sphere of space encompassing the entire void fleet simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not transported elsewhere, but edited out of reality with surgical precision. The enemy ships didn't explode or disintegrate, they simply were not and had never been, leaving behind empty space that somehow remembered their absence. But the cost of this ultimate victory became apparent immediately. The human construct that had achieved this impossible feat began to fade, its component ships becoming increasingly translucent as the effort of rewriting reality on such a scale consumed their ability to maintain coherent existence.
Admiral Mitchell, Princess Zara called out urgently, your ships
are fulfilling their purpose, Princess, came the Admiral's calm reply, though her image was now flickering between dimensions.
This is why we exist. This is what it means to be humanity's guardians.
As Princess Zara watched in growing horror, the human fleet began to dissolve into streams of pure information that dispersed throughout the quantum substrate of space itself. They were dying not through destruction but through transcendence, becoming part of the fundamental structure of reality in order to ensure that their protection would remain permanent.
Wait, Princess Zara cried out, there has to be another way.
You can't just sacrifice yourselves for us.
Admiral Mitchell's fading image smiled with genuine warmth. Princess, you still don't understand what we've become. Death is just another tactical parameter for us now.
We don't sacrifice our lives for others, we invest our existence in the continuation of everything worth protecting.
As the last of the human ships faded from visible reality, Admiral Mitchell's final transmission came through with crystal clarity.
Your Majesty, she said, addressing the communication pickup that would carry her words to Queen Lysaandra, your daughter asked who protects you while you sleep.
The answer is that we do. We always have, and we always will.
Humanity chose long ago to become the guardians that the galaxy needed, even if it meant we could never again be the species we once were. The transmission ended, leaving Princess Zara alone with the silence of space and the gradual understanding of what had just occurred. The human fleet was gone, but somehow she knew they weren't truly dead. They had become something beyond conventional existence, distributed throughout the quantum structure of the Valerian system as permanent protection against threats that operated beyond normal reality. Over the following hours, as Valerian cleanup crews ventured into the outer system to investigate the aftermath of the battle, they found evidence of what the humans had become. Quantum resonance patterns in the fabric of space itself spelled out reassuring messages in dozens of galactic languages. Gravitational anomalies formed protective barriers around populated worlds. Even the stellar wind from Valoria's star had been subtly modified to carry harmonics that would disrupt void technology should any other fleets attempt to approach the system. The humans had not just defeated the threat, they had transformed themselves into a permanent defense system that would protect the Valerian Empire for as long as the stars continued to shine. When Princess Zara finally returned to the royal chambers, she found her mother standing before the great windows, gazing out at a night sky that now contained invisible guardians woven into its very structure. "Mother," Zara said softly, "what do we tell our people? How do we explain what happened here?" Queen Lysandra was quiet for a long moment before responding. "We tell them the truth, my daughter. That there are forces in this galaxy that most civilizations are not equipped to understand, and that humanity has chosen to stand guard against those forces, even at the cost of their own conventional existence." "But why?" Princess Zara asked. "Why would any species make such a sacrifice for strangers?" The queen turned to face her daughter, and, in her ancient eyes was a wisdom that came from witnessing something that transcended ordinary concepts of heroism. "Because, my child, that is what it truly means to be human. They chose to become something greater than themselves so that others could remain what they are. They surrendered their nature so that the rest of us could preserve ours." Outside the palace windows, the twin moons continued their eternal dance across the sky, but now their light was accompanied by subtle harmonics that sang of protection and vigilance. The night sky itself had become a lullaby composed by guardians who had transcended physical existence to ensure that all sentient life could sleep peacefully. Years later, when Princess Zara had become queen herself and faced the question of how to explain the galaxy's hidden protectors to other civilizations, she would remember Admiral Mitchell's words and understand their full meaning. The humans hadn't just answered the question of who protects while you sleep, they had become the answer itself, woven into the fundamental structure of reality as living proof that some species will choose to sacrifice everything to ensure that others can continue to exist in safety. The Valerian Empire never encountered another void fleet, nor did any other civilization in their region of the galaxy. But, on quiet nights, when the stellar winds carried just the right harmonics and the quantum field fluctuations formed just the right patterns, those who knew what to listen for could still hear the whispered voices of humanity's guardians, standing eternal watch in the spaces between the stars. And, in the royal archives of Valoria, sealed for access only by future queens, lay a single document that contained the complete record of humanity's sacrifice. At its end, written in Princess Zara's own hand, was a simple dedication to those who chose to become more than themselves so that we could remain ourselves. The galaxy sleeps peacefully because you never do.